Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Naruto Awakens Ancient Race. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Awaken. He never has been one to make mistakes. Such a thing can lead to a gruesome death. He learned this a long time ago. Rise and serve your new whims. He is a king, an entity more powerful than any could hope to be, at least according to him. There are those in the world that oppose this idea with every fiber of their being. Open your eyes, mighty beast, and join the scourge. His name is Arthas Menthal. He's a human paladin transformed into a death knight and bonded with a lich and a cursed sword. He's one of the mightiest beings on the planet, and one of the biggest threats to the world itself. He currently resides in the deepest reaches of Northrend, commanding his undead legions to slowly infect the world. His current longing is the elimination of the Horde, the Alliance, and the Scarlet Crusade, for they are the obstacles that repeatedly stand in his way. Stand and give your might and your army over to me. He is always looking for new subjects, new allies to his cause. He will do anything to get them, including subjugating. He's already convinced the Vicryl and the Quillboar and has already raised several powerful dragons from the dead. Not to mention the countless other lesser creatures he has already subjugated. Your time of rest is at an end. He is constantly looking for new ways to improve his army, searching out any who could add strength to the scourge. The power of nature itself will no longer be need for you. He had stumbled upon something that would cement the scourge as rulers of the world forever, stored deep underground, imprisoned in a safe of crystal, a scroll depicting a race long forgotten. Awaken and embrace a new power. Such is the reason Arthas was currently standing before a person entombed in crystal in a large hall. His sword was pointed at the tomb, glowing with ancient and powerful magic, energy pouring from the blade and into the crystal, intent on breaking it open. In the scroll he found are legends surrounding this area, this citadel. Tales of this ancient and powerful race said to have ruled over the land thousands of years ago, even before the Titans arrived. And he found them, enshrouded in a powerful illusion and buried deep beneath Silithus of all places. Those Cenarian fools never even suspected. When at first he entered this place, he was nearly overwhelmed by the sheer amount of life energy in this place. It was the first time in a long time that he was actually awed by anything. But he pressed on. He had a mission to complete, one that would further his cause. Perhaps he could make this barren land his own as well, assign this race and the insects here to it as a new plague land. It took him an hour to actually find any solid evidence of the existence of this ancient race. It came in the form of another old scroll. It was full of powerful spells. The words, though foreign and illegible, glowed with energy and smelled of a bit of blood. This scroll was a powerful one. He couldn't help the spark of excitement that welled up when he found it. He'd hand it over to Kel'Thuzad later for translation. He found his solid proof 10 minutes later, and the sight that greeted him made him gasp in true wonder. It was a woman. She was frozen in crystal in a face-up position on her back. Her arms were crossed over her large bosom, silky pale blonde hair framing a perfect face, eyes closed in eternal slumber. A purple diamond mark was on her head, and a pair of canine-like purple ears sat atop her head. Her lower half was enshrouded in thicker crystal, blocking it from view, but he could see the tip of a tail. She's gorgeous, he had thought, but he didn't dare try and awaken her. He had a much bigger fish to fry before he could do that. So he, after giving the slumbering woman one last glance, continued on his way. As he progressed, he laid eyes on the frozen forms of numerous others, a girl with dark blue hair and pale skin, cute lips accentuating her cat-like fangs. A heavily muscled man with a pair of ox-like horns jutting from the sides of his head. A woman crouched over as if in thought, her short hair in the shape of a turtle-like shell and probably hardened as such too. There were hundreds of them, each one more unique than the last. Some looked to be of mixed inheritances, having the traits of more than one beast displayed upon their persons, while others looked to be of one ancestry. He eyed them all with a smirk. They would shock the world with their return to the world. He arrived at a large door perfectly preserved and stared at it for just a second before he entered. It was here that he found his prize. There were 9 of them, each one of them also slumbering behind a crystal veil, but he instantly knew they were the most powerful, the leaders. They were arranged in a way that suggested that they were at different levels of power. He scanned them all looking for the strongest one. His eyes landed on the one with spiky bright yellow hair. You are the one. Raising Frostmourne, he began his spell. Don't do it, you fool. You'll destroy us all. Don't try and twist the situation, Dobe. I told you I'd do anything to gain power. If that means I have to do this, then so be it. No menu. Stop. Too late. See you in the New World Order. Thobi. Erg. Brat. Do it. Do it now. Team. What are you doing, Dobe? Stop it. Hey, you lose. See you never again, fool. Flesh. What's happening? Dobe, what did you do? I told you not to, but it looks like I had to go with plan B. Looks like the furball's power outweighs your own. No. Say goodbye to your precious eyes, team. No. Let the merging begin. Make me proud, boy. Make us all proud. The age of ninja and the Uchiha is over, team. I'll see you when I wake up. If you survive, that is. No. Wake up. Wake up. Energy exploded from the crystal in a captivating display of crimson light. Arthas was nearly thrown from his feet by the backlash as the crystal exploded outwards, freeing the blond man and dropping him to the ground. His glowing blue eye were unfocused, shocked as the memory faded from his mind. A thick cloud of dust was kicked up, obscuring the Lich King's vision. Arthas took a tentative step forward, sword drawn in case of an attack, poised to subjugate this man if he proved to be a problem. Finally, the dust began to clear. A silhouette appeared and it made the Lich King raise an eyebrow at the strange shape. So, you're not human? He grinned. Happened? Where am I? A paw stepped out of the dust, followed by another, then a pair of crimson-furred canine legs in an upright position. Arthas was reminded of those Draenei when looking at them, except instead of hooves this man had paws. Damn, my head hurts. The rest of the body was revealed. A chest that was previously covered by crossed arms was revealed, a small open vest went down to just below his pecs, and a thick strap slanted diagonally across it, holding a massive blade to his back. His hands were normal enough looking in terms of human standards, save for the claws that looked like they could tear through steel. His eyes were a shocking shade of blue, but with a crimson ring outlining the irises, and his pupils were slit, like those of a feline. On his cheeks were 3 thick whisker-like marks each, and sticking from underneath his upper lip were a pair of fangs. His ears were ridiculously long like those of an elf, but more animal-like and covered in crimson fur as well. They slanted back from the side of his head, twitching as they took in the sounds around him. He wore a pair of dark red shorts that stopped just above his knees, and behind his back swayed 9 long crimson-yellow tip-tails. The man looked around for a second, his eyes adjusting to the slightly darkened area, then they widened. I'm awake. Arthas couldn't help the grin that danced across his face as he took a step forward, gaining the beast man's attention. The man gasped as tensed, his nose twitching, taking in the scent of death and decay. Who are you? He asked. His strange eyes focused more intently than what was probably natural. Arthas was unaffected, giving an evil grin as he began to approach the man. I am the Lich King, your savior and your new emsir. He raised his sword and pointed it at the man. I have awakened you from your slumber just as I plan to wake the rest of you, so that you may join the scourge and help me purge this world of all life. The man raised an eyebrow. Straightforward, aren't you? He asked while crossing his arms. Arthas couldn't help but laugh. He honestly expected indignant yells and proclamations of how he'd never join such a foul creature, but instead he receives a calm question about his recruiting methods. However, before he could speak again, the man spoke up. While I appreciate you waking me up, Lich-san, I'm afraid I must decline your invitation to join this scourge. He paused and grabbed the hilt of his weapon. Because now that I am awake, I have my own agenda to get started on, and I serve no one. Arthas felt no anger at this boy's defiance. He expected as much. However, it didn't stop him from narrowing his eyes and gathering energy. I am afraid, noble warrior, that you have no choice. A bolt of unholy energy blasted forth from the tip of Frostmourne and slammed into the man's chest, careening him into the crystal coffin of tall, dark-skinned man who looked like an ox hybrid with 8 tentacle tails. The crystal shook a bit but was unharmed. "Ugh," said the fox man as he clutched at his chest. He could feel the ill feeling spreading through his body, trying to slow him down. Arthas smirked and approached him at a steady pace. "You just woke up," he said. "You stand no chance against me. Submit now and save yourself the trouble." The man growled and staggered to his feet. "You're testing my patience, Lich San." Arthas chuckled and raised his sword again, his eyes taking on a more intense glow behind his helmet. "I'm testing your patience? Heh, how arrogant of you." He moved. It was almost too fast for the man to react, almost. In a flash, Arthas slammed his blade down into the man's own blade. An explosion of energies as different as night and day tore through the chamber and rumbled the ground. Glowing blue eyes widened in surprise as his opponent smirked. "I may have just woke up, but I am far from weak, Lich San." Then he heaved. Arthas was nearly thrown off his feet and barely had enough time to raise his own sword to block his opponent's counterattack. Another explosion of energy blew forth from the two. Arthas actually felt his arms straining under the force of the foxman's blow. "You are strong," he commented. "But the scourge will make great use of you and your people." The foxman leapt back as Arthas attempted to punch him in the stomach. Then he rushed again with greater speed than that last time and went for a horizontal strike. Arthas leapt up and over, allowing the blade to slam into the crystal tomb of a red-headed man with tanuki features. Arthas raised an eyebrow as he saw that the crystal was unaffected. Whatever sealed you all away must have been truly formidable." The foxman nodded. "Yeah, I'm actually surprised you were strong enough to release me." He readied his blade. "Though now that I am free, the crystal is sure to strengthen. You won't get anyone else out of here. Without help I won't even be able to awaken them now." Arthas smirked. "I am more than willing to lend you a hand." "No thanks, Lich San." Arthas sighed. "I see you cannot be reasoned with. But it seems I have no choice." An aura of cold began to glow around the Lich King, getting more intense by the second. Arthas gave the foxman a piercing stare before he said, "I am done playing with you, boy." Energy, massive and foul, suddenly exploded off of the Lich King in a display of power no single individual outside of the Scourge's most loyal and powerful enforcers had ever seen and lived to tell about it. The foxman's breath was washed away in an instant and his eyes grew to ridiculous proportion as his pupils shrunk in pure shock. Arthas smirked as his opponent froze. "Like I said, you are still weak. I can tell you are very strong, impressively powerful in fact. But most of that power is still asleep." He took a step forward and raised his blade, glowing runes emanating a foul, twisted energy, calling for the very soul of all it touched. "Do not worry. That power will return to you. I will make sure of that, my second in command." He laughed evilly as his swung down, the blade cutting right through the man's torso. Arthas smirked. "Welcome to the Scourge, mighty Biju-kin." An explosion of life energy rocked forth from the foxman, healing his slight wound in an instant and effectively cutting off the Frostmourne's link to his soul. Arthas couldn't help the gasp that escaped his lips. "What? So you know of my kind? Either we haven't been asleep long enough or there are legends about us." Arthas leapt back as the foxman swung at him with his tails, climbed to his feet and held up his hand, a sphere of pure energy mixed with wind itself suddenly coming to life in it, chaotic and powerful, screeching as it grew more powerful by the second. "If you know about us, then surely you must know that the QB is not so easily defeated. It was fun while it lasted, Lich San. But I too am done playing games." He charged, rearing his energy sphere back, preparing to drive it right through the stunned Lich King's chest. "Goodbye, Lich San." He shoved the sphere forward. Futon Rasengan. "No!" Arthas at the last second threw Frostmourne against the Rasengan in a last-ditch effort to keep himself unharmed. The foxman's eyes widened in horror as the two conflicting energies mixed, then exploded with the force of a massive bomb. Arthas had no choice. He had to teleport, creating a death gate just as the explosion tore outwards. However, the foxman was also caught in the gate, flailing wildly through the air. Sheet was the last this heard before both warriors vanished. On the surface, the druids of the Cenarian Circle gasped in wonder as a massive explosion sent debris miles into the air, destroying one of the massive silithid hives in the process. "What in the name of Elun was that?" shouted a patrol. "I don't know." They waited for the commotion to settle and for the dust to clear. Once it did, they could see a distant green glow. The druids could feel the energy, the life coming from that area. They were drawn to it. They set out an hour later, not knowing they were about to make a great discovery. In the forests of Tricyphal Glades not too far from the Scarlet Monastery, the Death Gate appeared, unnoticed and unheard. The foxman stumbled out, clutching his injured right arm and breathing. He was a mess. His clothing was in tatters and his blade warped and cracked. Blood was streaming from a gash in his forehead and one of his tails was broken. "Damn, that lich guy sure doesn't know how to quit." He took a few more red breaths before he passed out from exhaustion, never hearing the gasp or seeing the two figures rapidly approaching. The Scarlet Inquisitor. High Inquisitor Sally Whitemane blanched in disgust as the pair of young warriors who came into the cathedral, dragging with them something that could only be labeled as an abomination, yet, upon seeing the creature, could do no more than ask a question with a voice full of fascination and scorn mixed together. "What sort of creature is this thing?" One of the warriors, a girl with pale blonde hair, gave a nervous look to her leader and spoke. "I do not know, Emistus. He appeared in the forests. I do not know how, I only saw him collapse." How interesting. Tell me, is he Scourge?" Numerous tests have proven that he does not have the plague. But there is evidence that he was fighting something from the Scourge. I can sense much power within him. Whatever he was fighting was strong. There was a pause. Whitemane's fascination only grew. She'd never seen anything like this man. "Leave him. I will handle him from here on. Return to your post." Though confused by the utter lack of blood that should have followed upon being turned over, they both gave salutes and turned on their heels and left. Whitemane looked back down at the creature, taking in his very human-looking face, and traced a delicate hand along his jaw-line. "You should count yourself lucky," she began, her voice a cruel and amused whisper, "that you're such a unique thing that we found ourselves too curious to simply kill you." Another pause before the sound of delicate but authoritative footfalls began to echo through the area as she left the unconscious best man on the stairs, heading out towards the Amory. Just before she exited out of the massive doors, she turned to her second-in-command, Scarlet Commander Morgraine. "Make sure he is properly healed and looked after." The man was shocked, but he dared not disobey. "Yes, Amethyst." The druids traversed the open chamber in a daze, looks of awe and wonder on their faces as they examined the temple. Their fingers trailed along the crystal mechanically as their minds processed what they were seeing. What is this?" muttered one, a night elf of short stature, as she peered at the beings behind the crystal. "Such life. Their energy. It fills me to the core with its presence." She was lost. An entire race asleep in this land. I never knew. "We must inform Lady Whisperwind and Lord Staghelm. This is unbelievable." "And look," said another, a Tauren, as he pointed to the shattered remains of one of the crystals and the numerous signs of battle. "Something was here, something undead." Eyes got wide then narrowed. Only one being was capable of the amount of power they felt in that explosion. The Lich King was here. Yes, and it appears he has woken one of them up. Indeed, there was a large table inside of a separate chamber surrounded by 8 people who were obviously the strongest. However, at the head of the table, only the broken remains of one of the crystals remained. "Secure this area," barked the commander of this post. "If these people have lost their leader to the Scourge, they are doomed if we cannot wake them. Quickly inform our superiors of this. We cannot let these people come to any more harm." He gazed back at the slumbering forms. "I've never seen beings like you before. Who are you?" He turned away, lost in thought. And how long have you been here? He received no answer. He stirred, as memories assaulted his mind. The sound of his voice laced with pain could be heard as he spoke out in his restless sleep. No, dear menu. You have to sacrifice, goodbye. He clutched at the sheets tightly, his tails beginning to thrash around as the memories grew too strong. Team, he suddenly shouted as he sprung up, eyes wild and unfocused for a few seconds until they blinked. He wondered. Where am I? He was in a rather plain but still very fancy-looking room. He noticed that the main color scheme favored the colors red and white. He looked around shocked at first as he remembers passing out in a creepy forest. His blade was leaned up against the wall, in definite need of repair. Hell, he was surprised it lasted as long as it did against that lich guy. He examined himself as well and noticed that he had bandages wrapped around his head and a section of the tail furthest to the left. He could tell instantly that it was broken. Several more bandages covered his chest and injured arm as well. He went to get up, wincing as his legs protested the sudden movement and stretched as far as his body would allow without causing him pain. DMN, he muttered. Lich-san was right. Most of my abilities are still asleep. I'm not even healing. He sighed. In time, I guess. His eyes locked onto the door, a pair of beautifully carved piece of mahogany pieces that obviously swung outward. He didn't know what to expect as he approached and put his hand on said door, so he made himself ready for anything. However, he froze as the door swung open to reveal the surprised face of a woman with pale skin and silver hair. Her gray eyes widened a bit and the bandages she was carrying dropped to the ground due to her surprise. He himself found himself struck dumb. This woman was human. He was stunned. Humans hadn't existed for 100 years when he was last awake, yet here one was. And she was appealing. The red markings on her face looked like tears of blood, but they fit her well. Her silver hair seemed to shine with light from underneath the red chapeau she wore. Strapped to her back was an appealing staff with a large red gem placed in the center of a diamond shape. Her arms were covered in red coverings that went from her hands to her upper arm, and the only thing she seemed to wear over her torso was a red and black tabard covered in intricate golden designs, and on her legs were a pair of black and red stockings and red leather boots. He sensed no chakra, but there was an aura about her. So she was a different type of human than what used to be. How fascinating. He found his eyes roaming up and down her body. Her thighs were thick but well-toned, as was her stomach and arms. Her chest was large. Not as large as he's seen, but still pretty big, and her lips were full and covered in black lipstick. He couldn't help the slight blush or the silent, wow, that escaped his lips as he eyed her. But then something else suddenly became apparent, something that made his eyes narrow. There was a taint within her, a foul energy warping her mind and clouding her rational thought. He became more guarded. The woman herself just scoffed and crossed her arms, not bothering to retrieve the bandages laying on the floor. She had to look up at him, something that, even though was well hidden, intimidated her. He towered over her by a head. She snapped out of her staring quickly though and looked at him with a superior look in her eyes. So the beast is awake, she spoke, attempting to fill her voice with malice and disgust. He tried to move a bit, but she gave him a stern gaze as she pushed him not so gently back onto the bed. Be still. You've been hurt. Biting back a curse as he landed on his broken tail, he looked up at the woman. How long was I out? She shrugged. 2 of our scouts brought you here 4 days ago. He raised an eyebrow in surprise. 4 days? I've really been out for that long? I must have been more injured than I thought. He chose not to reveal that he usually has an advanced healing rate for risk of being taken and dissected in a lab, not that he wasn't worried about that already. The woman looked him up and down, frowning at his obvious non-human status, and asked rather gruffly, "What is your name, beast?" Wow, this chick is rude, he thought as he crossed his own arms. It's considered polite to give your name before demanding others. Her look turned hateful and her hand twitched towards the staff on her back, but she forced herself to relax, if only for now. Whitemane, she ground out. Whitemane. What an odd name, but I guess I can see where it fits, considering your hair and all. Her hand twitched towards the staff again. But anyway, where are we? Are we still in that creepy forest? You still haven't answered my question, she growled out, the hatred beginning to bubble over. He widened his eyes in surprise, then chuckled as he rubbed the back of his head. Oh, sorry. He stood back up and gave a sweeping bow to the woman, grinning the whole time. I am Uzumaki Naruto. She looked at him with a raised eyebrow. Sounds Pandaren. He merely shrugged. Could be, he muttered. Impossible, she sneered at him, causing him to develop a twitch in his eyebrow. But he held back his retort in favor of flopping back down into the bed to get more rest. Whitemane just stared at him with a mix of loathing and curiosity. You are a strange one, she muttered to herself at last. Naruto heard her though and asked, how so? She stared at him, her gaze trying to burn a hole in his head before she said, a creature such as you is unique. I have never seen nor heard of one such as you before. He raised an eyebrow. Weird. That lich guy seemed to know a lot about us. He shrugged. One would say that I'm new around here. She looked at him again, her eyes flashing with something he did not recognize. You're an off-worlder? She asked. He closed his eyes and sighed. Not exactly. Frustration began to show on her face. Explain, she demanded. He opened one eye as she sat down on the bed next to him, her eyes telling him that she wasn't leaving until he told her everything about himself. Meh, so demanding, he said with a playful smirk. You know you still have yet to tell me where we are. Something akin to a snarl left her lips as she leaned in close to his face, their noses nearly touching. I assure you, beast, that you do not want to know, she said, a cruel smirk dancing over her lips. It was his turn to scoff. Heard that many times before. Trust me when I say you could not surprise me. She sneered and barely resisted the urge to slap him. Where we are is a place all beings not blessed by human forms or the touch of light should fear to be. You should count yourself lucky that you're even still alive. He raised an eyebrow again. And why am I still alive if you're such a prejudiced person? She said nothing, then suddenly shot to her feet and practically stormed out of the room. I suggest you recover quickly, beast. And watch what you say while traveling around this place. The Scarlet Crusade gives second warnings to no one. Then she slammed the door. Sheesh. Naruto placed his hands behind his head and closed his eyes. From what he could tell, the world was vastly different than it had been when he was last awake. And humans? He reappeared. A different species perhaps, but still, he must have been asleep for a long time for that to happen. He still wasn't quite sure if that was a good thing or not. Lich-san and Whitemane seemed to fit into a pretty negative a trend, but he made sure not to make any judgments based on his meetings with those two. He sighed. Man, what an eventful 2 hours I've been awake. He chuckled an ironic chuckle. But I guess it's better than being asleep for Kami knows how long. He turned his head and winced as his ear bent at the odd angle it was being bent at. Ouch, he said tonelessly as he fixed his problem and proceeded to examine his blade. It was an appealing combination of red, blue, and silver. 6 feet 10 inches long from the end of the handle to the tip of the blade. It was designed like a BSTRD sword, but clearly designed with a Zanbato in mind, double-edged but far thicker at the hilt, then progressively narrowing down. The blade glowed an appealing royal blue, but the edge was crimson, just like his eyes. The hilt consisted of a silver fox head seeming to glare at unseen foes, and the handle extended out from the top of the design where a glass sphere swirling with red and blue mists. 3 metal tails dyed red at the tips stuck out from each side of the fox head by around 7 inches. It was a nice sword, but it had taken a beating under the power of the Lich King's sword. He sighed and turned away from his blade, boredom already starting to overwhelm him. But he also didn't really want to get up and leave the room yet either. The Scarlet Crusade, or whatever, sounded like some sort of organization that hated all forms of life not human. Of course, this also made him wonder. Just who or what did these Scarlet guys have to be prejudiced against? So many questions. Sheesh, if only someone not trying to kill me could have woken me up instead. Then my entrance into this time wouldn't have been so effed up and abrupt. He winced as his ribs gave him a slight twinge of pain. Then he remembered that his arm was injured. Freakin' ouch, he exclaimed as he winced again, sitting up. Screw it, he muttered as he slid out of his bed. His ears twitched as they picked up movement from outside the room. He contemplated grabbing his sword but decided that would send the wrong message to a bunch of crazy people no doubt looking for any excuse to take his head and mount in on a plaque. With a final sigh he approached the door and pushed it open. The sounds of people gasping met his ears as he stepped out. He felt himself tense and develop a sweat drop as he eyed the hundreds of people suddenly staring at him. Most notably was Whitemane and a tall blonde man dressed in red and wearing a headband on his head while gripping a appealing mace rather harshly. Shit, maybe I should have grabbed my sword, he thought. The blonde man's eye narrowed as he turned fully to face him, his eyes gleaming hatefully as he approached. Abomination, he growled out. Tainted creature. The blonde Biju-kin said nothing, merely looking down at the man with a raised eyebrow, all too used to names such as that. Name's Naruto, he said. Yours? The man growled and fingered the handle of his mace. More grain, said Whitemane. Enough. The man relaxed almost instantly. As you wish, my lady. Naruto examined the man closely. He was pretty well built, dressed in armor and the same tabard, but he could feel that this man was pretty strong. He could feel the energy radiating off of this man and many of the people in this chamber. It was the same energy he felt on Whitemane, even with that mysterious taint. He looked at Whitemane. She had her arms crossed and was staring at him. I suppose you want to learn, she said, disdain dripping heavily off of her voice, as if a creature like him didn't deserve to learn anything. I suppose it's only natural if you are indeed new to this world. She made a dismissive gesture. There is a library in this monastery. Go there and learn all there is you need to. How exactly am I going to get there? I don't know where it is. She gave him a smirk. You will just have to look. I'm sure you can sniff it out. His eyebrow twitched and he turned away with a huff, ignoring her amused chuckle as he headed down the path, scaring the rest of the people who quite frankly did not know how to handle something like Naruto. Do not cause trouble, beast, and do not leave the monastery, called Whitemane as he opened the massive double doors. What am I, your pet? He responded before he exited. Whitemane chuckled again. Morgraine looked at his commander and asked, Are you sure it is wise to let that thing wander unsupervised? She gave a careless shrug. Leave him be. It was a simple command, one that Morgraine was all too willing to obey. However, he did have to wonder what was going on. Why do you show that beast such leniency, my lady? Arthas was not a happy man. He'd lost his only chance to gain the Biju-kin as new members of the Scourge. He knew, Juts knew that Silithus was crawling with the druids of the Cenarian Circle and quite possible swaths of Horde and Alliance as well by now. He was not a man to get exceedingly angry often, but this was an opportunity he was quite upset to have lost. The Biju-kin leader had proven to be more resilient and powerful than he had expected. He had underestimated him, and now because of that, a powerful new foe was wandering around, quite possibly searching for a means to awaken the rest of his brethren. He couldn't accept that. He paced back and forth within his chamber in Icecrown, hordes of undead making haste to stay out of his way. This is most vexing, he spoke to no one. He looked up and gave a sigh. But then he smirked. With an assertion of his great control over his minions, he called out, Mashinin. There was a pause, then in a swirl of blood crystal, a tall blood elf with sky-blue-haired, glowing eyes and pale skin appeared in a kneeling position. The Lich King raised an eyebrow. The elf was covered in blood. Forgive me, Lord, began the elf. I am still furthering the cause of the Scourge down below. The Lich King smiled. No worries, he began. I simply have a task for you to complete when you are done with the Scarlet Lands below. Mashinin looked up. For me, my lord? The Lich King pierced the Death Knight with his stare. Yes, it will prove your loyalty to me. Mashinin didn't suddenly start groveling like most others would have. This amused the Lich King a great deal. Now he knows he chose the right person for this task. There is a man, a powerful beast-like creature from ages past. I attempted to initiate him into the Scourge. I failed. Mashinin's eyes widened in wonder as an image of Naruto appeared in his head. The Lich King spoke once again. After the Plague Lands have been firmly secured by the Scourge and the Scarlet Crusade residing in Havenshire down below are nothing but corpses. You are to find this man. Mashinin stared at for a few more seconds before he spoke again. What am I to do with him? Arthas smirked. Recruit him. Mashinin nodded. It will be done. Good. However, Mashinin gave a slight scowl as he left the Lich King. He was almost free. He could feel the hold of the Lich King slipping away. It was only a matter of time. Something would trigger his full release from the Lich King. He knows the Lich King knows it too. Mashinin was never under the full control of the Scourge. But he'd never done anything to betray the Scourge, so they left it alone. That would be their mistake. Over the next week, Naruto became very familiar with the Scarlet Monastery and its residents. The younger, weaker subordinates still avoided him at all costs, but the leaders of this place had warmed up to him, if only enough to have short conversations with him. Arcanist Doan and White Mane were the two he spent a lot of the time talking with. The mage seemed quite excited to teach even a beast, while White Mane had taken to following him everywhere he went, usually insulting him every time she spoke. He had quickly grown accustomed to her presence. He spent nearly all of his time in the library learning all he could about the current timeline. And what he learned shocked him to the core. He'd seriously been asleep long enough for entire new races to be born and evolve and die. Entire civilizations had fallen and risen numerous times, and the world itself had completely transformed. Entire continents had vanished while new ones formed. That made him and his brethren well over millions, billions of years old. And that's freaking unreal. He had refrained from telling White Mane or any of the others this, of course. Currently the world was in a state of turmoil. These factions called the Horde and the Alliance were perhaps the world's strongest defense, yet they spent more time fighting each other than they did actually fighting the threats that could very well kill them. Threats like this Burning Legion and the Scourge. The numerous races had intrigued him as well. 10 main races and well as numerous smaller, not very well acknowledged races dotted the world all over. The more he learned, the more he wanted to get out there and explore. With such diversity, he was sure to find powerful allies that could help him awaken his brethren. He had also learned that the Scarlet Crusade was much more dark than he had originally thought. At first they were a rather noble and valued ally to the Alliance, but something went wrong. The Alliance betrayed them, according to White Mane, but he could also tell it had to do with the tainted energy he could feel swirling within them. The fact that he was alive after being found by them had finally caught up to him. These people were delusional zealots driven by insanity and bloodlust, trusting nothing but their own. He had wondered what they saw in him that made them spare his life. Perhaps it really was his uniqueness. White Mane had said so on numerous occasions. He had come along rather well in his recovery too. His arms and sides no longer caused him pain, and the bruise that had been on the back of his head was gone as well. His legs were still a bit weak, and his outermost tail to the left was still broken, not to mention the repairs that still needed to be done to his blade, but he was doing extremely well. Currently he was walking back towards the cathedral and his room when he was interrupted by a man who was even taller than he and heavily muscled. Naruto sighed as he looked up at the man. This was perhaps the only man in this monastery that Naruto actually truly disliked. "Herod," he began. "Go put a DMN shirt on, will ya?" He ducked under the punch and leapt away as an armor-clad foot tried to plant itself in his stomach. "Watch how you speak to me, creature," he growled out. Naruto rolled his eyes. Herod was further along into the madness than most of the others in this monastery, and he let it show every time he encountered Naruto, attacking him whenever he could despite the High Inquisitor's orders to leave him alone, cackling the whole time about needing a decent challenge. Naruto had quickly grown tired of it but had refrained from attacking back, merely dodging and vanishing before the crazed Scarlet Warrior could respond. Herod glared at Naruto from behind his helm. Thoughts of slaughtering this beast constantly plagued his twisted mind, demanding that he rid the monastery of this tainted creature no matter who had taken a liking to him. He couldn't stand this creature who was so obviously powerful yet refused to fight him. Naruto raised an eyebrow when Herod grabbed his axe and brandished it in Naruto's face. "I can't take it anymore. Die, foul creature." Naruto laughed as he leapt up and clung the ceiling with chakra in a crouched position. Herod roared and went to throw his weapon. "Herod!" He froze as White Mane marched up the hall, scolding glare upon her face. "Leave the beast alone," she commanded. Herod looked shamed for a second before he gave a strained, "Yes, milady," before stomping off. Naruto chuckled and dropped down in front of the woman, grinning in thanks. Without a word, she turned and started heading towards the cathedral area. He followed without a word, once again getting lost in his thoughts. Meanwhile, a woman with glowing red eyes and silver hair smirked at the large company of Forsaken before her. "Tomorrow," she began as she liked her lips, "we will rid this land of those obnoxious red ants." There were cheers. Tomorrow would mark the true beginning of Naruto's journey. When Naruto woke up the next day, he was pleasantly surprised to find his body completely healed. The grin that split his face lit up the room like its own source of light as he gave a yawn, practically leaping out of bed and stretching as far as he could. He looked at his palm and concentrated, grinning with a bit of satisfaction as a tiny tornado came to life, then died out a split second later. "Looks like some of my abilities are already beginning to awaken as well, sweet." He was happy. Barely 30 seconds and today was already looking to be a great one. Without a word, he exited his room and noticed immediately that there was no one around. Probably all still asleep. Just how early is it anyway? He didn't spend much time thinking about it, merely gave a content sigh as it meant peace from those pains in the buttes that call themselves the Scarlet Crusade, especially Whitemane's confused, but only a week and a half into knowing her and he could figure out if that woman liked or hated him. The way she constantly insults him and his species would suggest one thing, but the way she insists on following him everywhere, asking if his injuries were hindering him in any way, suggested another. He couldn't figure her out sometimes. Had no use wasting a good morning griping about her, he muttered with that grin still on his face as he pushed open the massive cathedral doors and stepped outside. There were some soldiers, priests and mages posted outside. They paused long enough in their patrols to give him a hard stare before going back to ignoring him, deeming him not a threat, for the most part, and continuing on in their mutterings and prayers to the light. He too paid them little mind as he looked up at the sky. It was a darker gray than normal but lighter than it was when he went to bed. He could still smell the dew in the air, and what little wildlife he could sense in the surrounding forest was still winding down from their nightly activities. "Such a gloomy place," he muttered as he made a leap, propelling himself to the roof of the cathedral so that he could enjoy his time alone for the moment. As he sat, crouched on the ledge of the roof, he found his mind beginning to wander again, memories once again swirling to life in his mind. They plagued him every time he was not occupied with other activities. Being around Whitemane quelled, if not outright stopped the memory flow, but when he was alone like this his mind had no choice but to wonder. He sighed as he examined his claws. Biju-kin. It was the name he had given him and his people shortly after they were born. It was a name that could have become the most famous yet feared name there ever was. Unfortunately, they were forced into that slumber before they could truly begin to carve out a chunk of history for themselves. They were barely 100 years into their reign when they were sealed away. He smirked a bit, pointed fangs seeming to gleam as they jutted over his lip. If there was one good thing that came from this, it was the peace he had finally managed to bring his world. But it had come at the cost of the entirety of the ninja culture collapsing. But during the 100 years in which he was getting used to his new body, the world had stabilized and calmed down. His generation had finally taken over, guaranteeing a long-lasting peace for the world. He closed his eyes as the image of a man with raven hair and glowing red and black eyes appeared in his mind, superior smirk adorning his face as he raised a transformed arm to the middle of a massive multiple eyes statue. "And to think it was all because of your crazy but a team?" he muttered. "What in the name of the light is a team?" Naruto nearly fell off of the roof in shock as he flinched and let out a startled yelp, spinning around to see the hound chuckling at him. "Loxy, don't sneak up on me like that. And how in the hell did you even get up here?" The Scarlet Crusader just shrugged while laughing, not bothering to answer the question as he sat down next to the Biju-kin. Naruto sent him one more glare before relaxing and sitting back down. "What the hell are you doing up so early, hyena man?" Loxy sent him a warning glare that Naruto ignored as he grinned. "I could be asking you the same thing. You know the lady will not be pleased to find you gone from your quarters." Naruto raised an eyebrow. Hey, I know she feels differently, but I'm not her pet. The hound in here chuckled as he looked up at the gray sky. She is rather possessive of you though. I find it strange personally. Naruto shrugged. I do too, especially since I'm not human. You guys by all rights should have dissected me the first chance you got. So you have reminded us more times than I can count. Can you even count very high? Loxi punched him in the shoulder, scowling as Naruto laughed. Of all the Scarlet Crusaders, Houndness Loxi was the person Naruto had liked the most. The man was goofy and had a great sense of humor. It didn't take long at all for the two to get along. Hell, Naruto had trouble discerning whether or not Loxi's insanity was caused by the tainted energy or just natural. Either way, he made surprisingly entertaining company. So, just what are you doing up here? Asked Loxi again. Naruto sighed and gazed up at the sky. Just thinking about the past. The past is quite a burden to those who let it be. Naruto nodded at those surprisingly wise words, not really saying anything. Loxi grinned and gave the blonde a sudden hard shove, propelling him from the roof and towards the ground. Wah! Crush! You're acting too gloomy, beast man, called Loxi with a laugh. Lighten up. Naruto, who was nursing the sizable lump on the top of his head, gave a growl and said, I'm gonna lighten you up, you insane dolt. By removing that bald fat head, he shouted. Loxi laughed again, then promptly vanished, running for his life while chuckling the whole time. Naruto just sighed and got to his feet. Fucking butt, he grumbled while checking his tails to make sure none of them had gotten broken. Again. Some of the Crusaders gave him disapproving looks. He just ignored them. Beast. He spun around and locked eyes with a scowling Whitemane. What are you doing out of your quarters? She demanded. Naruto crossed his arms. Getting some fresh air. Is that a crime? He asked. And what the hell are you doing up so early? Her scowl got more intense, causing the Biju-kin to laugh. You'll get wrinkles if you keep scowling like that, Whitemane-chan. She growled, not knowing what Chan meant but sure that it was some kind of jest at her expense. She marched up to him swiftly and grabbed the strap across his chest, yanking him down so she could glare into his amused eyes. You're coming with me back to your quarters. Isn't that your room? And isn't that a bit sudden? I mean, I know I'm good looking. And everything but. Whitemane punched him with surprising strength, her face a dark red. I'd never commit such a horrible atrocity. That why you're blushing? Be silent. Ignoring his amused laughing, she dragged him back into the cathedral and back towards the room. Morgraine smirked at him knowingly while the other zealots and such scrambled out of the way. He said nothing as he was dragged into the room and shoved into the bed. Oof, sheesh, a bit rough, don't you think? He asked, still grinning. Whitemane was not amused. She flopped down onto the bed, sitting next to him, still glaring into his eyes. He saw her eyes flash with something dark but ignored it. She was clenching her fists tightly, her face twisted into an upset scowl. He sighed and placed a hand on her shoulder. Thought I was leaving, huh? He asked. She didn't answer for a second before she glared at him. You are going to stay right here. He sighed, not knowing why she wanted him around but feeling a bit exasperated in her obviously foolish thinking that she had control over him. Look, I know I'm a new creature to you and your crusade, but that's just it. She glared defiantly at him. He smiled slightly. I have things to do, Whitemane-chan. I'm not meant to be cooped up in one place. I appreciate you guys looking out for me in my weakened state, but I'm really going to have to leave soon. He went to stand but was stopped by a hand clinging almost possessively to his wrist. He looked back down at her in surprise at seeing her pleading look. He couldn't help but chuckle. Naruto was no idiot. He knew all about the Scarlet Crusade and what they are all about. He knew for a fact that these people were sick and twisted, borderline evil. His sensitive ears could hear the tormented cries of captured adventurers and people who had attempted to assault this place in the past. Hell, he'd been down there and witnessed some of the horrible torture methods enacted onto the numerous captives. He mused with some amusement that if he had met these guys when he was human, he would have attacked and killed everyone here, fought his way all the way down to Interrogator Vishaz and freed all of his victims. But now he really wasn't affected by what the Scarlet Crusade was doing. He knew they were messed up, but he didn't really care. Not to mention he was in their department, in Whitemane's department for taking care of him. Besides, it's not like torture was anything new to him. Even Konoha partook in the torture of its captives, and they were hailed as the biggest softies in the world. Oh, and let's not forget that he's been asleep for millions of years. The last thing he wants to do is get into a fight again. Besides, he was sure he could free these guys from whatever held such a negative sway over them once his power completely returned to him. He focused his attention of the woman who was still clutching his wrist. "Relax," he said as he affectionately rubbed the top of her head. "I'm not leaving yet. I still have to reawaken at least one elemental affinity before I'm sure I can defend myself properly out there." She looked relieved for a split second but quickly hid it, then she raised an eyebrow in interest. "Elemental affinity? Are you a shaman? Or a mage?" Naruto chuckled. "Not really sure what a shaman or a mage is, but I'm pretty sure that I'm not either of those." He held up a hand and grinned. A tiny tornado flickered to life in his palm for a second before dying again. "My species are people of nature. We work with the elements, speak with them, talk with them. They are our partners in nearly everything we do. I wonder how they will react once they realize that I'm awake? Or which one's gonna realize I'm awake first and come to me?" He neglected to inform her that his people were also half demonic. The Biju were demons with great control over elements. The shinobi were humans with a bond to nature itself. Combine the two and with an inward chuckle, he realized just how much he kept hidden from the crusade. They really didn't need to know that much about him anyway, and he really didn't want to have to deal with that fallout should he tell them even half of the things he's kept hidden. He didn't want to think about what Whitemane would say if she learned this. He was sitting again, getting lost in his own thoughts. Whitemane snorted and said, "Sounds like a shaman to me." She then looked at Naruto intently again. "Tell me, what exactly is a Biju-kin?" Naruto snapped out of it and looked at the silver-haired woman. It's hard to explain. I guess you could call us remnants of the distant past, beings created by a man's dark ambition, another man's sacrifice, and a bonding with powerful beasts of nature." Sounds like a lot of CRP. Naruto chuckled. "Perhaps it is." Whitemane stared, not really sure how to take that statement. 69. This was too easy. The Dark Lady had assigned them a rather simple task, the elimination of the Scarlet Monastery. She didn't care how they did it, as long as the task was done. They had decided to go straight for the leader. The rest would fall easily after that. They had set out early in the morning before the sun had even risen above the horizon and traveled swiftly atop their mounts. They killed all crusaders they came across, keeping anyone from heading back and warning their leaders of them. It was pathetically easy. They slaughtered their way through the halls and the gardens leading towards the cathedral, leaving a bloody trail of destruction in their wake, so focused on their task that they didn't bother to wash the gore off of their weapons. One of the group had even gone so far as to remove one of the tabards of the Scarlet Crusade from the corpse of a slain enemy and put it on himself, grinning at his companions in a mocking manner. "So the objective is to kill Whitemane and her lapdog first, eh? That shouldn't be too hard." This comment came from a white-haired blood elf paladin as he cleaned his blade. The group had decided to rest for a bit in the courtyard just outside of the cathedral, 30 or so corpses strewn haphazardly about in a brutal display of blood and gore. It is not wise to underestimate your opponent. There is a reason Whitemane still lives despite the countless assaults to this place. This came from a gruff-looking orc warrior who had a scar running across his face. He was sharpening a huge battle axe that glowed with the enchantment of fire. The shadowy undead Rouge beside him nodded her head quietly, her own daggers glowing with enchantments meant to poison on contact. "Hey, you don't have to tell me that," said the hunter with a smirk as she ran her fingers through the mane of the large white lion beside her. The last person, another orc, didn't say anything. His gear clearly showed off that he was a shaman. His mace glinted in the dull hall and his shield, a large turtle shell, rested on his back, waiting to be used. He too was anxious. This group he was traveling with, practically all of them were strangers. They were just a group of young adventurers brought together by a common goal. Only the hunter and the paladin seemed to know each other. The rest were still getting to know each other. However, they fought well together. The perfect blend of classes. They could have brought more, but everyone else seemed to be busy. Not that they were complaining. The less people doing this, the more recognized their individual strength would be when this was over. "All right," began the paladin with a grin as he prepared his mace and shield. "Let's do this." Not much could bring Tyrant Whisperwind from the confines of the Temple of Elun. The same could be said about Fendril Staghelm and the Cenarian Circle. But the news of this sleeping race brought both of them, along with numerous others, to Silithid. Adventurers from both Horde and Alliance lost all thought of fighting each other as they entered this citadel of wonders. It was like a museum. Each person frozen in crystal was so amazing looking like humans crossbred with numerous beasts of nature, but without taking away from their overall beauty. There was something ethereal about them, something ancient and powerful. Tyrant was enthralled in what appeared to be the king's chambers, looking at the 8 forms frozen in place with varying looks of peace of contentment on their faces, looking almost like innocence encased in their crystal of dreams. She approached the frozen form of a man with red hair and black ringed eyes. His face was nearly emotionless, only a slight strain of doubt marring his face. The tan, slightly round ears on the sides of his head made her giggle. He was so cute. She wondered what was contained in the large gourd on his back, or what the slightly worn-look blue and white cone-shaped hat clutched in his hand had symbolized. She also wondered what the symbol upon his forehead had meant. "Such a mysterious people you are," she muttered. She'd been alive for centuries, and even she did not know what these people were or where they came from. Are they invaders? Prisoners? Or had they truly been here longer than even the Night Elves? She turned and headed out. She would find the answers. If these people were indeed a race more ancient than the Night Elves, then a greater map of the history of Azeroth had been discovered. Perhaps they knew what the Well of Eternity truly was, or maybe they even helped create it. Hell, they might even be able to give valuable info about the old gods. Her excitement began to grow. "Notify the rest of the Alliance," she told a nearby Night Elf sentinel. "I feel they should know of this as well." Meanwhile, a Tauren was also on his way to notify the Horde. Neutral he may be, he still felt that this was something they should know of. Of course, he didn't even think about the conflict that would come from this. Silithid was about to change forever. They ran like the hounds of hell were after them, like their lives depended on it. In a sense, their lives did depend on it. They didn't really know. It had taken all of their power and will just to get out. The Scarlet Crusade had chased them for a few hours after that. But those humans were not what they were running from. They could still feel the very wind lapping at their feet as if trying to ensnare them, could hear that unnatural roar, see those otherworldly blue and red eyes. Fear clouded a good portion of their thoughts, screaming at them to run faster. The Orc Shaman and the Undead Rogue were the only survivors. The rest of their group, they didn't want to know. No words were said. No words needed to be said. Only actions needed to be taken. It was dawn when they reached Brill, running right through the small town, ignoring their exhaustion and their less than ideal conditions. Worried scouts and other young adventurers called out to them, but to no avail. They only had one destination, one place they could feel somewhat safe. They reached the Undercity at around noon and were met by a startled Forsaken warrior who promptly led them to an inn to rest and recover. It didn't take long for word to spread through the Undercity as the members of a group who had went to conquer the Scarlet Monastery. It was a shock that they had managed to get away from that place. It took a week for them to recover, and when they did, they immediately received a message from the Dark Lady herself, requesting their audience. "Your names?" she asked with no emotion. The rogue stepped forward first, giving a slight bow. "My lady, I am Laviria." The orc looked at her in the eyes and said, "Kemal." She was slightly annoyed at the orc's tone but chose not to address it. Instead, she focused on the reason she brought these two here. "It has come to my attention that you two have escaped from the Scarlet Monastery. I won't even say how disappointed I am, seeing as 3 of you were quite experienced. Those red ants should not have even been a problem. Care to explain?" Kemal said nothing, preferring silence to words, leaving Laviria to take up the reins. "It was easy," she began. "The 5 of us cut through all who stood in our way. They were no match for us. It is for this reason we decided we were going to go straight for Whitemane. With her dead, the rest would be easy pickings. We slaughtered our way all the way to the cathedral, where we met a group of well over 60 crusaders in prayer with Morgraine in front of them. That battle, while taxing, was also won, giving us a chance to confront Morgraine. Taking him down was relatively easy as well. But from there things got worse. As soon as Morgraine fell, the doors burst open and that woman strode out, glowing with light and fury. She brought Morgraine back in an instant and proceeded to attack with greater power and skill than anything else in the monastery. She nearly killed us. But we prevailed, killing Morgraine again and knocking Whitemane to the ground. She paused to gain control over her shaky emotions, something that made the dark lad raise an eyebrow. But then the doors opened again and out stepped a creature I had never seen before in my life. We were all shocked so much that we didn't hear his gasp and yell out for Whitemane until he was in front of us with his massive blade jammed into the paladin's chest. He destroyed us, my lady. He was like a beast. He was a beast. He yelled something about attacking Whitemane and making us pay before he roared so loud and so fiercely that it locked up our joints in fright. The hunter's lion was the only one unaffected and tried to lunge at the creature's throat. But it didn't work. The man spun in a complete circle with his sword and cleaved the lion in half with little to no effort at all. The hunter, distraught by the death of her partner, screamed and charged. He grabbed her by the neck and snapped it like a stick. She was shaking a bit, clearly still distraught over the brutal deaths of her teammates, and took a second to regain her composure again. The warrior knew this fight was lost. He charged at the man and stunned him for a second, commanding us to run, that he'd stall for time. We obeyed. But it didn't end there. This creature man, he was like a dog, a wolf on the hunt. We heard him kill the warrior, then we heard him coming. I have never been so terrified in my life. He chased us all the way to the exit of the Scarlet Monastery and then some, growling out warnings to never come back again. My lady, if the Scarlet Monastery is to be destroyed, we need to kill that man. She eyed the two for a minute before she looked up in thought. This man, what did he look like? Laveria took a second to think. He was tall, nearly 7 feet tall, perhaps 2 or 3 inches shorter. He has wild, spiky, bright yellow hair and eyes that are blue outlined in red with a feline slit pupil. His ears are long and covered in red fur, and his legs are those of a wargen but with red fur, and his torso, arms and face are those of a human. He also has 9 canine-like tails. The Dark Lady eyed the rogue for 5 minutes until she was certain there was no deception about. She sighed. I see. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. The cathedral doors opened again and in strode Naruto, looking grim-faced. His eyes scanned the area, ignoring the numerous dead bodies until they landed on Whitemane. Light flooded around her as she muttered to herself. Her hands were pressed onto Morgraine's chest as she desperately tried to restore him with her powerful gift of light. She was growing increasingly more distraught as she pumped more and more energy into him until at last Morgraine's eyes snapped open and he gasped. Am I lady? There was a pause and Naruto swore he saw relief shine in Whitemane's eyes for a brief second before they became blank, and she spoke. Morgraine, she began as she helped him to his feet. She didn't say anything else. Nothing else needed to be said. Naruto watched these two and couldn't help the slight smile. Perhaps there was hope for these crusaders yet. Then Whitemane collapsed. He was there in an instant, catching her and lifting her up bridal style. Just rest now, Whitemane, said Naruto with a soothing voice as he held her. The woman sneered at him. I need no help from the likes of you. Naruto snorted and rolled his eyes before silently heading back to the room. Try not to get yourself nearly killed again, Whitemane-chan. I only owe you so much, you know. She could only stare as he gently placed her in bed and tucked her in. The action made her feel like a child. Leave, she commanded, hiding her current feelings and making Naruto chuckle. As you wish, my lady. He closed the door, leaving Whitemane to her thoughts. And when they finally stopped rushing through, she widened her eyes in realization. He saved me, she thought. She cast a look around the room, spotting both her staff and Naruto's massive sword leaned against the wall next to each other. A sudden rush of a feeling she could not recognize flooded through her, and she clutched the spot where her heart is. Naruto closed his eyes and sighed, trying to get some sleep. His mid was completely relaxed despite killing 3 people and terrifying 2 others. They had invaded this cathedral. Whitemane was being attacked. Despite her disposition and the nature of the Scarlet Crusade in general, he wasn't about to let that happen. Besides, he rather liked the High Inquisitor, and he could safely say that he considered her a friend. He gave a smile as he drifted off to sleep, leaning against the cathedral doors from outside. Get rested up, Whitemane-chan. Because I have a feeling all hell's gonna break loose soon. Meanwhile, Lady Sylvanas Windrunner, Banshee Queen of the Forsaken, gave an evil grin as numerous posters depicting a very accurate description of this mysterious beast man. Numerous Forsaken and members of the Horde examined the posters and felt excitement growing. The Scarlet Monastery was going to fall. Sylvanas would make sure of that, personally. Perhaps I've found worthy prey at last. Varamathras looked down at the undead blood elf leader of the Forsaken with what could be interpreted as a raised eyebrow as she strapped her quiver and bow to her back, equipped her swords and daggers, and secured her cloak over her shoulders. You seem very excited about this, he said. Sylvanas looked up at the Nethrizim with a gleam in her eyes he hadn't seen in a long time. Of course I'm excited, she said with a bitter grin. This beast that dared to oppose the Forsaken by aiding those red ants, he's something new and unexpected, and he'll make an excellent trophy. She began to walk, heading towards the trading center of the Undercity where numerous groups of eager Horde adventurers were gathered, waiting for their chance for glory and gold at the prospect of wiping the Scarlet Monastery off the map. There weren't many, as Sylvanas had posted that poster of this beast man only the previous day, and it was only those who had been in the Undercity who had the chance to accept this quest when was posted had eagerly jumped on the chance. Not that it mattered a great deal. There were more than enough Forsaken to fill the ranks. I'll mount his head on my wall. Varamathras gave a grin of his own. Good hunting then, my lady. As she stepped into the open, she was greeted by a small army of Forsaken and Horde, all cheering and ready. Kamal, though silent, was eyeing the mass of people before him with a blank face. The undead rogue next to him looked scared at the prospect of going back there, and he couldn't help but feel a bit of that fear as well. But for some reason he was going back. Laviria was going too, if only because she really had nowhere to go and that Kamal's presence made her feel safe. The orc had assured her that they were going to kill Crusaders, and that was it. They weren't going anywhere near Whitemane or that beast man. She was still unsure but more relieved. They both paid little attention to the speech the Dark Lady was spouting out, about revenge and how those human scum had finally crossed the line. His only focus was making sure he survived. Because for some reason he just knew it wasn't going to go as smoothly as everyone else thought it would. Finally they began to move. He eyed his companion next to him and gave her a reassuring nod, relaxing her a bit. Let's go, he said. All right. 69. Naruto was once again laying on his bed in thought when Whitemane barged in, looking angry. Oh, what seems to be the problem now, Whitemane-chan? He asked with that annoying grin she wanted to kick right off of his face. She glared at him for a minute before she sighed and sat down on the bed. I guess I owe you a bit of gratitude, she ground out, as if it pained her more than being burned alive would to say that. Naruto chuckled. You guess? He asked with a raised eyebrow. She glared again, her face reddening with anger. He laughed. You're so tense. What, is it your time of the month or something? Sheesh, relax. Her aura flared, golden and bright, making him stare at her in wonder. She was strong. And the energy was so pure. Well, that is, if you discount that taint from whatever it was that was making her insane. After the light faded from her, leaving her breathing and near dead on her feet, he gave her a warm smile and caught her gently as she began to collapse. He lifted her up bridal style and gently placed her on the bed. It was nothing, Whitemane-chan. I owe you after all. Whitemane's eyes flashed and she sat up, glaring at the Biju-kin leader. Don't expect anything like this again, beast, for it will not happen a second time. Naruto's response was a chuckle and, sure, Whitemane-chan, as he turned to leave the room. However, a barely audible whisper caused him to pause. His ears twitched and he looked back toward the white-haired woman. What was that? He asked. The High Inquisitor sighed. Sally, she said almost hesitantly. Naruto fully turned to face her, his long furry ears twitching again. What? She sat up a bit and glared at him. My name is Sally. Whitemane is my last name. Naruto's eyes had widened for a second before he grinned. Sally, huh? Pretty simple, but it's a cute name nonetheless. He paused and gave her a wink. I'll see you later, Sally-chan. He turned and exited the room, missing her blush. As he exited, he caught sight of Loxy and ran after him. Dog boy, he yelled in mock anger. Said dog boy yelped and took off. Get your butt back here. I still owe you for pushing me off of the roof. Loxy laughed like a madman and vanished into the halls. Naruto grunted. For a geezer he sure can. Run, he muttered as he turned to an amused and very beat-up-looking Morgraine. Don't say anything, ihol, he said as he stalked off, scaring some of the other crusaders as he passed them with his fake anger. Morgraine just chuckled. For an abomination, that beast was all right, especially after he had saved the Lady Whitemane. Oh, and if that cranky woman asks where I'm at, tell her I'm out exploring the forest. Morgraine looked ready to protest, but Naruto was already gone. With a curse, he shuffled towards his room. Hopefully the beast would be back before the lady noticed he was gone. 69. As Naruto stepped outside and into the surroundings of the forest, he took a whiff of the air. It was dreary and stagnant. A taint permeated the air and the elements cried out in pain around him. He felt sadness well up inside for a second as he listened to the land and heard their cries for help. The world had definitely changed a great deal. Everything was different from what he remembered of the world. All these new and exciting places, cultures and people roaming about, accentuated by their wide variety of talents and fighting ability, but at the same time, the world was in turmoil. Things like Scourge, Burning Legion, corrupt dragons and warring elementals with power unlike anything seen in the world posed a constant threat to the world. Beings from the cosmos far away called Titans see the world as something as an experiment, convinced this world would be a savage, uncouth one without their guiding, interfering hands. And beings calling themselves old gods infected the world from beneath. He had no idea what these old gods were. They definitely were not around when he was last awake. But he could guess that they were invaders, probably from another world or a whole other dimension. And the chaotic elementals are most likely a result of the lack of guidance from their lifetime partners and avatars, the Biju, or Biju-kin as the case may be now, and without the protection and partnership of the Biju, the elements fell prey to those old gods. He sighed. He and the Biju-kin had a lot of work to do as soon as he found a way to wake them up. It was time for them to assume their role on this world. They are the last memento of the past anyway. A remnant of Azeroth's early childhood. Azeroth. He rather liked the name the people had come up with for the world, and as the last symbol for what used to be called the elemental nations, it would be the Biju-kin's duty to guide these children. They will be the instrument that restores Azeroth to the thriving paradise it had once been. Minus the conflicting shinobi, of course. As he walked, he memorized the forests of Tricyphal Glades. This would be the first place he healed when he was back to full power. 69. It took nearly 4 hours to get to the monastery, but this didn't dampen Sylvanus's or anyone's mood for a moment. They were too excited at the prospect of taking out an important sect of the Scarlet Crusade. The small army was an impressive one nonetheless. Hundreds of Horde and Forsaken flanked the Banshee Queen on either side, and surrounding those flanks were several catapults equipped with explosives and bombs laden with plague. She stood there staring at the Scarlet Monastery from a distance of about 1,000 yards and gave a smirk. She then turned towards the small army gathered behind her. There was no need for a rousing speech or even any words beyond a simple command. I want those catapults to target that cathedral. We will draw her and her pet to us. She then broke into a dead sprint. The rest followed, bellowing war cries. Drawing her bow, the first crusader she spotted only had time to widen his eyes before an arrow lodged itself into his throat. A second later, the rest swarmed the area and poured into the monastery. 69. Whitemane's eyes snapped open as a feeling of unease washed over her, so great she nearly shuddered. Eyes widening, she shot out of bed, grabbing her staff and burst into the hall of the cathedral where Morgraine was waiting. "Something is off," she said, sounding tense. The paladin nodded, his own weapon was drawn and his eyes looking focused. Whitemane looked around. "Where is the beast?" she asked. Morgraine looked apologetic. "I am sorry, my lady, but he insisted on exploring the outside forest. I do not know when he'll be back or if he'll even be back." A feeling of dread shot through Whitemane and shot up and down her spine. Her heart rate quickened instantly and a surge of adrenaline flooded her body. She bit her lip and fought down the feeling rising in her gut. "Damn it," she snarled. "I told him not to leave." Morgraine raised an eyebrow at her. Her tone was concerned almost. He didn't know much what to make of it. As it was though, he placed a comforting hand on her shoulder and spoke in a soothing tone. "He will be back," he began. "He is fond of you. He won't abandon you." Whitemane only looked slightly more convinced of this but opted not to say another word. She opted instead to focus on the feeling of unease. "Something is happening. I can feel it," she muttered. A second later an explosion sounded off in the distance, but within the confines of the monastery. Whitemane's eyes widened. "Morgraine, gather the others." Another, more terrifying explosion suddenly rocked the cathedral, bathing everything in fire and shrapnel. 69. He had gone quite far, just wondering, taking in the scents of the forest and basking in the wind as it blew by gently, ruffling his hair and fur and seemingly stoking his cheeks. He could feel it. The wind, the earth, the water, they were here. They were still active but still unaware of his presence. He gave a smile. In due time, Naruto's ears twitched suddenly as did his nose. He froze in mid-step and turned towards the Scarlet Monastery, dread suddenly flooding his entire body. "What the hell?" he muttered, his entire body suddenly tensed. It sounded like explosion went off, but the people of the monastery didn't use explosives. He leapt to the top of the tallest tree he could find and gazed in the direction of the monastery. It was quite a ways away. Demon, he had gone further than he had thought. However, he could still see the monastery, and what he saw made him nearly drop his sword in horror. Smoke was billowing up from the Crusade's stronghold. Someone was attacking. He shouldn't have let those other two get away. He had known they would be back with reinforcements. The scent of blood and smoke was suddenly strong on the wind. "Saline," he muttered as he drew his sword and shot off in the direction of the monastery. He'd be dead if he lost his first friend since waking up. "Hold on, Sally-chan, I'm coming." He failed to notice the slight increase in the flow of the wind as he shot toward the monastery. 69. Chaos reigned throughout the main hall entrance to the monastery. Kemal's mace crushed the skull of a priest foolish enough to turn her back to him. Beside him, Laviaria effortlessly and skillfully dispatched crusader after crusader, invisible to unskilled eyes. All around them the sounds of battle reverberated. The swarm of Forsaken and Horde completely overran the main hall in minutes and then proceeded to flood into all four doors leading to the armory, the library, the cathedral, and the graveyard. Sylvanas herself had vanished long ago. Her interest was solely on that beast man and Whitemane and no one else. "Kemal," started Laviaria with a gentle tug to his cloak, snapping him out of his thoughts. The two Horde members were suddenly alone in the main hall. Everyone else had already proceeded deeper into the monastery, leaving behind the bloodied remains of their victims. The hall was eerily quiet, almost foreboding. A sudden explosion rocked the ground from somewhere near the cathedral, or was it at the cathedral? Laviaria looked uncomfortable. The shaman gave the rogue a reassuring nod, then gestured towards the door leading to the library. "Let's go," he said. "All right." 69. That explosion. It came out of nowhere. What the hell happened? How did they get here so fast? As the dust cleared, Whitemane's dirt-smeared face scowled, masking her fury and her sudden fear. A sphere of holy light was still glimmering around her form as she stumbled out from beneath a chunk of broken roof. It was reflex alone that had saved her life. The light sprung to life around her seemingly just as the explosion happened. "More grain," she yelled, hoping that her childhood friend had survived. A beam of wood moved aside, revealing the Scarlet Commander and several monks, huddled together under a protective dome of light. Morgraine's brow was knitted tightly and his face was unnaturally pale and glistening with sweat. My lady," he rasped out, looking barely alive. Whitemane's eyes widened and she hurried over to him in order to help remove the debris keeping them trapped. "Hold on, Commander," she muttered as she pulled and twisted, using every ounce of strength her petite body had in her until finally, a large chunk of wood and broken pillars slid away and allowed for Morgraine to drop his barrier. He dropped, gasping for breath a second later. There was a sudden gasp. "My lady! Look out!" A barrel-shaped bomb about as tall as Whitemane descended from above and smashed into the wall right next to where Whitemane had been until one of the monks had shoved her out of the way. The following explosion threw her across the room, and she crashed painfully into a suit of armor. She cried out in agony as she felt a couple of ribs break. What the hell had happened? Arg! Gaping in horror, Whitemane watched as the dust cleared to reveal a sickly green slime splattered all over the place, rotting away the very walls and floor. A putrid stench assaulted her nose and she realized with fascinated shock that the smell was that of rotting flesh. Lady Whitemane! A hand rose up, rotting and discolored, followed by a body still dressed in red plate armor. Whitemane's breath left her mouth as Morgraine, no longer alive, rose to his feet, terrified eyes staring back at her in disbelief and resignation. "Lady, you must." The Scarlet Commander's rotting body then seemed to liquefy and fall apart before her eyes. Around him, the monks, including the one who had saved her, perished under the same circumstance, their bodies breaking apart and becoming part of the mass of green slime. Margarine. The plague. The Forsaken were using a plague. The green slime twitched and began to move. A distorted human face formed on its surface before it rose up as a single mass that towered over her by 2 feet. Whitemane heard one word before she screamed in terror. Ryun. 69. Burn in righteous fire. Several more foolish adventurers were turned into smoldering corpses at his feet as he unleashed his explosion of arcane flames. Arcanist Doan swiftly moved his way through the library, heading away from his study and crushing any foolish enough to get caught in sight. These horde monsters and their undead abomination allies have gone too far now. What? It isn't enough that they constantly send little groups to kill them all, but now this. This invasion? A rogue appeared behind him with the intention of backstabbing him. Doan's arcane energy exploded outwards, flinging the Forsaken away like an old doll before he was then obliterated by a large fireball. He had to get to Lady Whitemane. Clearly, if an invasion of this scale was happening then, he needed to get to the cathedral to assist with the defeat of the enemy. Loxi was no doubt already there. He had no idea where Herod was and Vishaz was probably already dead. He was not an idiotic man. He has always been able to deduce with pinpoint accuracy and finality, and what he was concluding made his heart surge with fear and excitement. The undead had finally gotten serious. The long-coming conflict was here at last. That banshee was most likely here as well. He rounded a corner, arcane energy flaring around him and staff at the ready. He was met with the sight of an orc and a Forsaken. They both looked rather surprised to see him, and he too was equally surprised. Corpses of both Horde and Crusade lay strewn about everywhere. There were still a few clinging to life. Their pitiful emptiness echoing through the hallway with an almost haunting quality. Herod felt rage surface within him. There were his subordinates, his students, his comrades. More monsters come to die? He readied his staff, fire bursting to life around him. Prepare to die. The orc reacted first. Doan almost didn't see him strike. The mace he wielded blurred forward at his head, nearly ending the fight right there before it even began. He ducked, barely avoiding a fatal blow, but still received a blow to the shoulder, snapping the bones there like cheap sticks. Doan's mind exploded into agony as he was thrown back a good 20 feet and slammed into the wall. He wasn't given any time to register his sudden injury as the undead girl was suddenly before him. She was strangely young-looking. A slightly chubby, unmarred face stared back at him with nervous but determined yellow eyes. Dark green hair done up in pigtails. Her body was almost perfectly persevered. Unscathed pale blue-gray flesh covered every part of her body except for her forearms and hands, which were completely bone. She was a rogue. Her gear just screamed that. Monster! Scourge! Away with ye! Arcane energy exploded from Doan and rocketed the forsakenness away from him with a loud yelp of surprise. The orc caught her almost effortlessly and placed her down. Make peace with your gods, if you have one, muttered Doan as his magic began to swirl around him. The orc grunted something in his language and made a few gestures with his hands. 4 totems sprung from the ground around him, and the orc's hands began to glow. The orc was a shaman, a powerful one. But Doan was ready. Today the crusade will prevail, he yelled as he readied his attack. Doan's entire body froze and his very soul cringed in unbridled fear. Lady Whiturk. And his mistake cost him. Doan's wide, fearful eyes swiveled down to meet the rogue's. Her eyes looked strangely sorrowful. I am sorry, she muttered as she removed her dagger from his throat. The orc looked on impassively as Doan collapsed. No, it can't end like this. Lady Whiteman, that was your voice. Lady Whiteman, Demon it. His vision began to darken. It wasn't supposed to end like this. I'm supposed to protect. Doan died, full of sorrow and regrets. Kamal gave one look to the devastated-looking human mage and turned away. Let's go, he said to the rogue, who gave a nod and followed after closing Arcanist Doan's eyes forever. May you find peace at last, she muttered with a pain-filled voice. 69. As soon as that scream tore through the air, he paused. His eyes took on a shine no one knew he was capable of. His entire mind went blank and filled with one objective and one objective only. All around him was chaos. Bodies littered the floor and bombs continued to pepper the monastery at random and haphazard intervals, though the majority seemed to be aimed at the cathedral. Dozens of fights between his subordinates and the invaders raged all round him. The air was rent with screams, clashing metal and angry animalistic snarls and barks. He had to get to Lady Whitemane. Nothing else mattered except the safety of his leader. So, pulling out his whistle and readying his rifle, Loxy acted. The sharp noise, too high-pitched for human ears, shot through every hound in the area and alerted them to the call, but none of them acted on it. They didn't need to. From seemingly the shadows themselves emerged 4 canines nearly as tall as any human male. Vicious and ready for battle, Loxy's hounds were a far cry different from the mastiffs the rest of his subordinates used. No, Loxy's hounds were hyenas, extremely intelligent and cunning hyenas with a gleam in their eyes that could match the zealotry of any crusader. They approached Loxy seemingly without a care about the chaos around them and waited. I'm sure you heard it too, my beloved partners, he muttered, to which the hyenas nodded. Lady Whitemane is in trouble. We shall protect her with everything we have. The hounds let out knowing growls and laughter like barks and began to move. Onward then, he yelled, breaking into a dead sprint. An orc tried to intercept him. He went down with a hole in his chest a second later. Out of the way, fiend, he shouted as he continued past the dying humanoid and into the hall. Nothing was going to stop him. 69. Whitemane burst from the ruined doors of the cathedral with wide, fearful eyes, casting a glance behind her. The slime was right on her, but, the green muck oozing between cracks and slurping out of the open door, its face was firmly locked on her and its entire mass quivered with a strange excitement. It had happened so fast and she was overwhelmed by her emotions before she knew it. She increased her pace a bit more. Boom. The wall to her right exploded outwards, sending her flying to the left with an agonized scream, jarring her already broken ribs and nearly making her pass out. The slime was coming at her, taking its time it seemed, in order to make her suffer more fear. Blood leaked from the corner of her mouth and her entire body screamed in protest to any movement. But she wouldn't fall. Not this easily. She staggered to her feet and forced her vision to clear up. This monster that used to be her friend, this twisted abomination created by those accursed Forsaken. Come then, monster, she whispered as the holy light began to pulsate around her. I think not, human. The slime froze suddenly and something landed behind the High Inquisitor. The woman's eyes widened as she spun around, leaping a few feet away at the same time. Sylvanas Windrunner stood before her, her face twisted into a devious smirk that promised much suffering. The Lady Inquisitor," she said. Abruptly, Whitemane's fear was replaced with hatred and anger. "You!" she yelled, light bursting back into existence around her. "You did this, monster. Abomination. Undead perversion of nature." The Banshee Queen smirked some more as the leader of the Scarlet Monastery screamed like an animal and rushed at her. "Yes, I did, human. And I plan to do so much more." Whitemane gasped in pain as Sylvanas kicked her hard in her broken ribs and sent her flying back. The slime monster quivered with the longing to devour her but dared not steal the Dark Lady's prey from her. Whitemane coughed up more blood and glared hatefully up at the undead elf as she approached. "Where is he?" she asked as she stomped on Whitemane's chest and pinned her to the ground with her foot. "Where is this famed protector of yours?" Gah. I won't ask again, human." Sylvanas's boot pressed harder into Whitemane's ribs, threatening to break the few left unharmed. But this only fueled the righteous anger inside the woman, making her sneer up at the other woman. "You die before I reveal that information to you, which..." Sylvanas sneered. "I will have this new toy. Lady Whitemane. Unhand her, monster." Two voices sounded at the same time, half a second before Sylvanas was literally thrown from Whitemane, two huge beasts snarling in their attempts to rip her throat out. Ugh! Whitemane had never been so glad to see anyone in her life as Loxy and Herod emerged and immediately rushed to her side. Or they would have had the slime monster not intercepted them, nearly engulfing Herod before a fight could ever begin. "Light!" exclaimed Loxy. "What in God's name is that thing?" Whitemane gasped, clutching at her injured ribs. Be careful. That thing is..." Boom. Gah! Another explosion, another trip through the air and another horrified scream. Whitemane had just enough time to see Loxy gasp in horror as the left side of his body melted away before a pale gray hand clutched her neck and hauled her into the air. "Gah!" Sylvanas sneered. "Is that all you can say?" she asked with another sneer. "My lady!" Herod rushed Sylvanas. The slime monster interrupted, but in his rage Herod cleaved right through it, disabling the monster for a few vital seconds. Sylvanas barely had enough time to drop Whitemane and move out of the way from the massive war axe. "Abomination! You shall not leave this monastery alive." With a roll, the Banshee Queen was on her feet again. Her swords drawn and her lip parted in a sinister smirk. The slime monster quivered in excitement, engulfing the rest of Loxy's body and swatting aside the two remaining hyenas, the other two having died in that last explosion. "Oh really?" began the undead woman. "And I suppose you are to bring about my death?" Whitemane looked up at Herod through half-lidded eyes. The huge man was positioned protectively in front of her, shielding her from both the Banshee Queen and her disgusting little pet. Bitter tears sprang from her eyes. The Forsaken had caught them so completely flatfoot. It was so pathetic. She had never felt so helpless. What had gone wrong? Huga! Herod tore Whitemane from her though with a mighty heave of his axe, hurling the weapon right at Sylvanas, who actually froze in shock at the sudden move. The attack would have succeeded. The axe would have split her right down the middle, ending the fight right then and there. Should have. But fate seemed to have one last trick up its sleeve. The slime monster, with a gurgle-like screech, slammed into the Banshee Queen, shoving her out of the way and saving her life. The axe planted itself in the wall with such force nothing was going to remove it. Three pairs of eyes widened as the distorted human face on the slam monster seemed to take on a more familiar appearance. "Sir Herod," said Loxy with a weak grin. "But it's obvious who deserves to kill this beach." The slime collapsed a second later and was nothing more than a puddle of goop. Herod had enough time to growl, "Din you, Loxy?" before a blade plunged itself into his stomach. "Heh, what a stupid comrade you have. That was your one chance and you were betrayed." Herod coughed up blood and glared up at the Banshee Queen even as he dropped to his knees. "Perhaps," he began as his vision blurred. Something landed on the wall behind Sylvanas, looking down at the scene. The wind suddenly began to pick up. But, I can see why he did it, he smirked as his head drooped. After all, he has the lady's faith, more so than Morgraine would. He smiled. Isn't that right, beast? Sylvanas froze as a growl, a menacing feral growl, that sent sudden waves of apprehension and fear coursing through her vey body sounded from behind and above her. It was then that she became aware of the rapidly volatile wind. She heard the High Inquisitor gasp out the name, Naruto, and spun around. There was nothing there. Turn around. Almost gasping, Sylvanas spun with her blade and found it locked with a glowing red and blue monstrosity of a sword and staring into a pair of similarly colored angry eyes. One arm held the High Inquisitor protectively against his body. Hello, Beach. Sylvans gasped as she took in an eyeful of his entire form, only had enough time to begin to gasp in awe before he spoke again. And goodbye. 69. Kamal's eyes widened and without warning he tackled Laviaria to the ground with a shout of, "Get down now!" And not a moment too soon, because the totem used to call the aid of the air itself shattered, right before everything else disintegrated under a sudden explosion of power and wind. A terrifying howl that reverberated all across the land accompanied it. Laviaria screamed in terror. Kamal shuddered in fear because he knew the cause, would always know the cause. He'd never forget that howl. With a prayer to the spirits and an application of stone skin to both he and Laviaria, he held on to the fragile rogue as the very winds picked them and the everything else around up and flung them all in different directions. 69. Glowing eyes snapped open. And from within his domain. They narrowed. What is that? It called to him. It beckoned for his aid. It pleaded for a partnership he knew nothing about. And yet, this is somehow familiar. He pondered. How? It tugged at his essence now and threatened to tap directly into his power, waiting to unleash it in a hellish storm of destruction upon the world. No. Aller forcibly drew himself away from the presence, feeling his very being struggle reluctantly to do so. It was so tempting, so inviting. It was like a long-lost friend was calling out to him. But he had to. He would give aid to no one he knew nothing about. But he will be watching. Oh, the Wind Lord would be watching, waiting to feel that presence again with a strange feeling of excitement. How intriguing! Sylvanas Windrunner didn't know fear. Having fought against, been defeated by, served then once again fought against a monster such as the Lich King, the Banshee Queen leader of the Forsaken had cast aside that emotion a long time ago. At least she thought she had. The second the words, and goodbye, left Naruto's mouth, the very ground itself it seems surged to life and ripped the Banshee Queen from her feet into the air, the wind, threatening to tear her asunder in its sudden ferocity, casting her, like an old rag doll into the hands of a sadistic child. All sense of mobility was stripped away, all sense of direction taken from her mind. Her ears threatened to explode from the noise alone, the howling gale that engulfed her not only destroying all that dare be near Naruto, but also robbing her of any other feeling. No doubt, she'd be deaf for a good chunk of time, if she was lucky. As the surging winds almost casually tossed Sylvanas about and across the silver pine forest accompanied by that unholy howl of rage and power, Sylvanas felt fear she had never thought herself capable of feeling. What the f is he? She vaguely thought as she sailed across the land, over her horrified and ravaged troops and finally through a tree where she landed in a broken heap. She barely had time to gasp before he was there, suddenly. Those terrifying yet stunningly appealing eyes glared down at her from behind a veil of howling wind. He took slow deliberate steps towards her, his tails, long and somehow terrifyingly majestic swayed behind him, fanned out, like the petal of an exotic new flower. Clutched protectively in his left arm's grasp was the High Inquisitor who looked to be barely holding on to consciousness. She was so small compared to him and Sylvanas noted that she too was probably tiny compared to this creature. That human looked so helpless yet so protected in that man's grasp. Clutched in his right hand was his massive blade. The thing was the most appealing blade she had ever seen, most certainly, and she could sense the magic swirling within it, nature magic. Wind and fire. That blade was element forged into a weapon. Astonishing. As he approached, she struggled to right herself, refusing, if anything, to die with no dignity. Her glowing red eyes locked onto his and glared defiantly. He paused. The howling winds were suddenly gone and the forest, suddenly still and empty. But she could see the swath of destruction he had wrought in his brief fit of rage, and that terrified her more. What was he? Was that a shaman's spell? It certainly seemed like one. He opened his mouth to speak, startling her out of her thoughts. "What the F dash?" he said, anger overtaking his voice. "Who the hell do you think you are, huh?" The point of his blade was at her throat, threatening to lop off her head. She said nothing, refusing to answer to this creature. If he was to kill her, she'd die with the satisfaction that she showed him no weakness. So she waited for him to become impatient and end her before he could get any pertinent information. A tail suddenly lashed out and wrapped around her neck, hoisting her rather roughly into the air and bringing her until she was nearly nose to nose with him. She cast a glance at Whitemane, so close. She could kill her before the beast could react, but she hesitated, and that was enough. He stared into her eyes for well over a minute before he sighed and tossed her away from him. She hit the ground with a thump and widened her eyes in surprise. "Whatever, I don't care," he snarled out. "You clearly have your reasons for attacking Sally-chan and her home, but I don't care enough to find out why. I have more important things to worry about." His eyes flashed and he gave her a pointed look. "But know this," he began. He paused to give her a challenging look, daring her to go against the warning he was about to give. "If you come after us, if you attack her again, I will kill you." He turned to walk away. "That is your only warning." He turned and began to walk away, fading into the mist, dismissing her. Her eyes widened at his casual dismissal. Like she wasn't worth his time, wasn't worth the trouble of fighting anymore. Her eyes then narrowed in sudden anger. "Don't turn your back on me, beast," she bit out. "Turn around and face me." But the Biju-kin was already fading into the mist. Willing her body to move with sudden renewed strength, she jumped to her feet and lunged. No one ignored her. "Face me." Naruto barely had time to widen his eyes before he was tackled bodily. Whitemane fell to the ground. 69. Two things are known, yet vastly unknown about Mashinin. The first is that Mashinin seems rather emotionless, showing disinterest in anything, even as he slaughtered crusaders below in the name of the Scourge. Those who know him often speak of his extreme lack of words, emotion, and overall longing to do anything. He appeared lethargic in his tasks, never doing anything more or less and never saying anything to suggest his thoughts. The second thing about him, something that is known only by a few, is that the Lich King's hold on him is moderate at best. Numerous other Death Knights openly dislike and distrust him. Some have even tried to kill him, angry at him for daring to be even a shred defiant to the Lich King. However, it is the Lich King himself who halted any attempts on his life. Arthas seems amused by Mashinin's situation, and since the Blood Elf Death Knight has yet to prove any disloyalty, there is no need to persecute him. This is something the young Death Knight used to his advantage. Because of the Lich King's misguided trust, or whatever it may be, Mashinin was able to think for himself, do things for himself, free himself subtly more and more each day, showing no longing for anything else, even to himself, except for that which he hoped would happen. Then he laid eyes on her. Most Death Knights retain their name from when they were alive, usually only changing their last name to match their style, personality of even their spec. Then there are those who are born with no memories, not even their names, or possess such an overwhelming ability that they pretty much had no choice but to adopt a new moniker for themselves. The Death Knight recruit named Glacial was the perfect example of this. She had to have been a frost mage in life. There was simply no other explanation for the phenomenon that took place upon her dark rebirth. He had been there, watching over the bound forms of unworthy initiates when he felt her power explode off of her, covering everything in a thick sheet of ice and nearly killing Instructor Resuvius on the spot. Earth. He had seen her eyes, wide and confused as her pale hand clamped down of the wrist of the necromancer responsible for reviving her, freezing him solid almost instantly with a gasp and hiss, had seen the tattered clothing she was wearing upon death and rebirth shatter like glass and crumble away from her. Ghouls and abominations, and unworthy initiates, all were consumed by her ice. All stood little chance. She caused a panic. Vesuvius was incapacitated, everything within a 30-foot radius was frozen solid, and everything else outside of that range was chilled to almost freezing. He had never seen such power. It awed him. It interested him. A couple of weeks later he saw her again, covered from head to toe in cloth and armor, enchanted and specially made for her, as normal armor would last but a minute before breaking apart. She couldn't touch anything with her bare hands, couldn't even be too close to others. She was a bit of an outcast. She didn't speak. No one tried to talk to her anyway. Even when taking instructions from the Lich King himself, she uttered not a single word. And her eyes glowed with the fury of 1,000 winters, cold and utterly blank. She was frost incarnate. She was terrifying even for a death knight. And yet, Mashnin couldn't stop watching her. She was an elf like him, her frame, hidden as it was behind plate and cloth, exposing no skin whatsoever, was still noticeably slender and curvy, and her gait, a graceful appealing melody that spoke of her skill in her past life. He followed her everywhere, subtly of course, making it seem like coincidence every time he passed by her by. He even stopped subtly freeing himself from the Lich King's hold in favor of observing this woman. It was around this time that Arthas had given him that assignment. A Biju-kin, their leader apparently, a race even older than the night elves and the trolls, powerful nature beings bound in crystal beneath the earth. It was his task to get this being into the ranks of the Scourge. It was also to be the last day he would see her. No, that was simply unacceptable. So he approached her. 69. Glacial had noticed that man stalking her shortly after he had began to do so. He thought he was being subtle, but to her he was basically a beacon, obvious amongst the countless drones, as a unique individual, his eyes when he looked at her shining with interest and want. What did he want? Why was he even following her? There he was again, walking right at her, perhaps meaning to simply act as if running into her was a coincidence. She almost smirked, such an obvious yet slightly entertaining man. She watched him out of the corner of her eye as he approached. No doubt he would continue on as if he hadn't even noticed her, then send a very slight and very quick glance back her way when he thought she wasn't looking. She suppressed an almost bitter sigh. Not like that man could get close to her anyway. Her cursed body would kill him nearly instantly. Glacial. Her eyes widened and locked onto her stalkers. He was talking to her. What changed? Her eyes narrowed and her face became a blank slate. They stood in silence for well over 10 seconds before she finally spoke, her voice, a cold frozen mist that carried on the wind like a whisper from the Lich King himself. What do you want? 69. With an expert back roll, Naruto threw Sylvanas from him and sprang back to his feet, ready for battle in an instant. The Banshee Queen too sprang to her feet, her eyes glowing with offended fury. "No one ignores me," she bellowed while drawing her weapons and leveling them at the Biju-kin. Naruto gave a deadpan look. "Are you effing serious?" He growled out, eyes narrowed and angry. "What did I just tell you, damn it?" "Shut up," she bellowed, rushing forth to engage her enemy. His sword caught her twin blades in a stalemate that lasted 3 seconds. With a heave, Sylvanas was lifted from the ground and tossed back like she weighed almost nothing. Her back hit a tree, and with a grunt and she slumped to the ground, breathing and snarling. Naruto growled like the beast he resembled and drew his blade back in preparation for a swing. The wind began to swirl around him again. "Lady Sylvanas!" 6 figures launched themselves from the bushes out of nowhere, blindsiding the Biju-kin and forcing him to leap to the side. Clad in maroon, gray, and black, the warriors attacking the Biju-kin howled out war cries, desperate to protect their Dark Lady from the Scarlet Crusade's bestial protector. Blades and shields at the ready, Naruto was almost shocked into non-action when he finally got a good look at what was attacking him. What the F dash? And an arrow nearly struck his temple for his second of distraction. Turning to snarl at Sylvanas, he crouched and leapt, aimed his massive blade for the Banshee Queen's ample chest, determined to end this little scuffle and get Sally to safety as soon as possible, and fell upon her with the speed of a bullet. Gah! Black blood exploded from her mouth as his red eyes widened in shock. With wind, it propelled him. And as the huge blade sunk deeper into her sternum, Naruto's eyes narrowed in resignation. The 6 Forsaken warriors all lunged themselves at him, flying into a rage when they saw their queen get impaled. 6 of his 9 tails lashed out and seized them by the necks, stopping their assault in its tracks and holding them in the air in a crushing grip by their necks. And as Sylvanas gasped for breath, he whispered, sounding almost sorrowful, "It didn't have to end this way, damn it. I gave you the chance to walk away." Sylvanas coughed one more time and then responded with a smirk. "That you did, beast," she began. Naruto's eyes widened when she pushed herself further up his blade until she was nose to nose with him. "And that was your first mistake." Her smirk grew and she gave him an almost SSL wink. "And your second mistake was underestimating the Banshee Queen." She took a deep breath and screamed, 888. "Biju-kin? And Lord Arthas wants you to get into contact with it." Glacial was recounting Mashinen's words in her head, and quite honestly, she was surprised by what she had been told. A mystical race of shaman-like demons imprisoned in crystal deep beneath the lands of the Silithid, and their apparent leader was on the loose after a confrontation with their king. This man next to her was to get this being into the Scourge? Mashinen simply nodded. "Yes," he began. "The Lich King wants me to do this. He claims it to be a test of loyalty, but perhaps it is a ploy to be rid of me? Either way, I'm not all that concerned. The task itself is interesting enough." She simply nodded. If anything, this task would get him out into the world. He was free to do whatever he wanted, as long as he completed the task given to him. She could understand why he would take the job, other than the certainty of death again should he refuse the king's order, of course. But she had to ask, had to gain the answer to the question that had been nagging at her the second he stopped her and asked to talk to her. "Tell me," she began, her glowing blue eyes seeming to pierce his very own red ones. "You reveal all of this to me, and take the time to engage in conversation, ignoring the obvious threat I am to you." She paused, examining her gloved hands and clenching a fist. "Why have you done so?" At this, Mashinen smiled. It was something she'd never seen any being of the Scourge do. Never. It was a genuine smile, one full of emotion she was certain no one in their position should be capable of. He stood, bent down, offered her his hand, and spoke 3 words. "Come with me." 888. He didn't know what happened. One second he was in her face. Then the next, Aergorga. Sylvanas was nearly eviscerated right then and there when he reared back in agony, swinging his blade to the left and throwing the Banshee Queen like a rag doll. He noticed none of this. His ears exploded from the noise, blood poured from his nose, his eyes went blurry and unstable. He collapsed writhing in agony as his head tried to split itself apart. The Forsaken warriors clutched in his tails suffered a second death as he lost control of his body, and their heads were quite literally popped off of their necks. Despite the grievous wound in her chest, Sylvanas smirked. The beast hadn't even seen it coming. And she gave herself a mental pat on the back in guessing that those ears of his did more than make him look cute. He fell so easily to the scream, more so than anything else she had ever fought. It didn't matter if he could control the wind or howl with enough force to crumble buildings. Having your eardrums destroyed always gets to ya, especially if said ears are super sensitive. She watched him roll around on the ground, cursing and writhing, and couldn't contain her smirk, even as her vision went dark. "This wound is nothing, beast," she said as she began to lose consciousness. "It takes more than simply a stab to kill an undead." She was certain a few of her Forsaken or other members of the Horde would find them before he could recover, and she very much looked forward to paying him a visit in his dungeon cell when she recovered. Unfortunately, she failed to take into account the High Inquisitor. Sally Whitemane cared not for the unconscious Banshee Queen sprawled out in a pool of her own blood a few yards off, a true testament to her feelings for Naruto that she didn't take advantage of this opportunity in favor of assisting him. He was breathing now, and she was certain he was close to passing out himself. It looked serious, his ears, nose and eyes was all bleeding. She herself was still reeling from the scream, and she knew she didn't have much time before she herself finally succumbed to the exhaustion. "See the beast," she said, and she helped him to his feet and slung an arm over her shoulders. Damn, he was so much larger than her. "W. Have to get out of here." She took a step and collapsed. Damn it. Ignoring the pain in her body's protests, she forced herself back up and shouldered Naruto's weight. Once she was stable, she ambled off into the forest, determined to get as far away from Sylvanas as possible. She limped in a random direction for an hour, determined, driven until she absolutely couldn't go on anymore. Her teeth clenched as she finally began to succumb to her injuries and exhaustion. Her ribs were killing her and her head felt like it was trying to explode. Coming to a rather innocent-looking clearing and approaching a thick-trunked tree, White Mane sat Naruto against the tree as gently as she could before collapsing next to him, breathing as he back-rested against the tree. Her bloodied mouth parted in a smirk. "Thank me, if we make it through the night, beast." There was a snort, and both of them willingly succumbed to unconsciousness. 888. Kamal was sure something in his back had been broken. It ached almost agonizingly every time he took a step. By all rights, that little trip through the air would have killed a lesser man, shaman or no, but he was among the stronger of his class and was able to sustain himself and the rogue girl as they fell. As such, the two of them were able to immediately begin making their way back towards the Undercity. They traveled in silence. All words that needed to be spoken had already been so, or would be later. Kamal cast a side glance to the rogue next to him. The girl was frightened, and rightfully so. That beastman's power scared even him a little. To be so in tune with the elements as to have one of them come to his aid without him even actively calling it or without using a totem spoke of the terrifying potential. And he just know that was only a sample. It was quite amazing. What shaman wouldn't want to have that kind of ability? Gasp. Laveria's gasp tore him from his throat suddenly and loudly. The rogue jumped behind him, daggers drawn and clutched in fearful hands. "What?" And his words died in his throat as they stepped into a clearing. It was him, the Beast Man and the High Inquisitor of the Scarlet Crusade, unconscious against a tree, both suffering from obvious injury. For well over a minute he just gaped at the two of them, shocked at what he was seeing. It seemed absurd that such a coincidence would even occur, but here they were, weak, helpless. He and Laveria could so easily bring them in and claim the reward. Kamal, the rogue tugged at his arm, snapping him out of his thoughts and causing him to sigh. He eyed the two unconscious people before him one last time before he made his decision. 888. Glacial stared up at him. Her entire body was frozen in shock. "What?" Mashinen's smile turned into a smirk and he reached out to her again, his glowing eyes flashing with hope. "Come with me, Glacial." She just gaped up at him for a few more seconds, before her eyes narrowed in suspicion. Mashinen's smile slowly faded a bit as the temperature began to plummet. "Why?" she hissed out. "Why the interest in me? You think I haven't noticed you watching me? Please." Mashinen looked surprised at first, then he began to sputter out denials about her claim, but she cut him off. "Spare me the act and tell me what I want to know." For a second Glacial thought the man was going to bow out and retreat, but that proved to be a wrong assumption as he straightened out and looked down at her, his face completely serious with no hint of a smile. She was startled by his abrupt change in demeanor. "You want to know why?" he asked with narrowed eyes. Then, suddenly, without warning, he moved in, yanked her to her feet and crushed his lips into hers. There was a gasp, and two pairs of eyes widened. "You fool!"